Welcome to Awakening Mindfulness at Work, a conversation that matters. I'm Pierre
And I'm Sarah Killeen. We are bringing to you conversations and practices to cultivate presence, calm, and balance in the workplace.
Welcome, Dr. Jonathan Fisher, and continuing our conversations about Just One Heart. And this time we're going to be focusing on lightness.
So, Dr. Fisher, in your book, you write a lot about your childhood and learning that true fulfillment is found in service and the pursuit of excellence. And the question here would be, what role does lightness play there and happiness? How can those cohabit and work together?
The question of how is it possible to pursue meaningful work and purpose in the world and also carry a sense of lightness is an interesting one. There are some people whose work involves being with people who are in pain or suffering. Those in healthcare, clinicians often are witnesses to other people's suffering over and over, and there's a heaviness to that. There's an emotional contraction that happens. And what we know from emotional contagion and empathic distress is that when we bear witness to the heaviness of other people's hearts over and over, our own hearts become heavy. And there are predictable reactions to this. I can tell you in my own experience, in order to eventually protect myself from the pain of my own heart being around others and suffering, I started to find ways to put up barriers around my heart, and my heart became protected with a tough shield on the outside. And I started to feel numb. I had difficulty experiencing any joy. I thought that I could only turn off the challenging emotions so that I wouldn't feel the bad. But what I didn't realize is that that's impossible. Ultimately, there's only one faucet there for the heavy emotions and the light emotions. And when we turn either one of them off, it can be hard to feel emotions in general. And so what I realized in my own journey through burnout was that part of the work was working through the heavy emotions that contract the heart. And at the same time, one doesn't have to wait months or years until we've worked through our anxiety or depression or daily stress in order to experience lightness and joy. We can begin them both at the same time. They're not opposites. And specifically, having a sense of purpose can feel heavy at times, and it can also be one of the most enlightening and enlivening emotional states that we have. From a physiologic standpoint, we know that when people are working in their sense of purpose, their body's inflammatory system is cooled off, the heart is often relaxed, and there can often be a sense of joy that comes with meaning. They work very tightly together. They're not separable at all. And I would go one step further to say, not only is it helpful to develop practices to lighten our hearts each and every day, it's necessary. Otherwise, we burn out. We burn out because without ways of lightening our load and lifting ourselves up, whether it's through joy, moments of laughter, amusement, connection with others, experiences of love, nature. I mean, the opportunities for lightening our heart are endless if we only choose to pay attention to them and not get caught up in the negative and the stressful. And so for me, and for those that I help in healthcare, knowing how to tap into these, as I call, heart waker states and emotions is critical to sustaining a lifelong practice in healthcare.
Yeah, the Heart Wakers topic is really so supportive. And actually, we always think of heartbreakers, but I love this idea of heart wakers. Related to what you just mentioned, Dr. Fisher, so one of the pillars that you talk about in the book related to being light and having lightness is purpose. And it may seem, in some way that this may contradict lightness, because when we have purpose, we're serious about the purpose, we're really into it, and we may not go lightly about it. So are these two an oxymoron, or are they really companions? And how do you explain the relationship between them?
I tell a story in the book that was some wisdom that my mother shared with me when I was a teenager that I, as so often is the case, I just didn't appreciate it at the time. And I told her that I wish that I could experience more joy and more happiness in my life. I was a worrier, a neurotic teenager, kind of nerdy. Nobody's surprised by that. And I said, I just want to be happier. And my mom, in all of her wisdom, said something that I think I misunderstood. She said, happiness is overrated. Happiness is
Mm,
overrated. You should pursue a sense of purpose and meaning. Mom was a nuclear physicist, dad was the town doctor. And so I was surrounded by this message that we had to be purposeful in everything, and that joy and lightness were not things to pursue in and of themselves. And I think I understand now what she meant, which is that if we only pursue happiness in the sense of pleasure and hedonic pleasure of the senses, it's going to be a trap, because we'll never get there, because desire will never end. But if we think about happiness in Aristotle's sense of happiness and lightness, which is not hedonic pleasure moment to moment. Otherwise, we would gorge ourselves on the best foods and the best wines and seeking pleasure all the time. But in the Aristotelian sense, pleasure is known as eudaimonia, which is this sense of having a purpose in one's life. And we can go forward 2,000 years to look at Viktor Frankl, who was a neuropsychiatrist and neurologist who worked during the Holocaust, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is often cited. And it, in fact, is the basis of this conversation we and so many coaches and trainers and helpers around the world base our work in, which is his science of logotherapy, which is helping people heal by connecting them again and again with their sense of purpose. And so where my mother comes back in, and what she knew was that these two things are not at odds. This idea of having a sense of happiness in the classical sense is very much tied to having a sense of purpose. It can lift us up. It can sustain us over time. And so I see these two are as inseparable, that having a deep sense of purpose and reminding ourselves of that purpose in the heart, in the dark moments, often can bring some lightness when it's most needed.
And for those of us who take that sense of purpose extremely seriously, and take their responsibilities very seriously, take life and themselves very seriously, would you have some practices to recommend to cultivate playfulness, to cultivate that sense of lightness, to bring more joy into their days?
I can tell you that in my practice, now 30 years in medicine, in cardiology and in leadership, there was a time when I had lost my lightness. I had lost my spark, and I really didn't think there was a way where I would ever find it again. Life and practice and professional world felt so heavy. And fast forward, I've found dozens of ways and practices to lighten my heart again. And I would say that that should be part of our education. If we're going into medicine, or anyone who's helping others and caring for others on a regular basis, part of your own preparation and training must be in learning to not bear the weight of the world each and every day, because it is not a weight that any individual was meant to bear alone. And so that's the beginning of how we get into these practices of lightness. And the second is to overcome the obstacle that my mother placed in my way, which is this belief in healthcare that lightness and joy and laughter and love have no place in the professional and serious environments where life and death is often at stake. I would like to end that as a myth, because our humanity and our ability to connect with patients and with our colleagues and with others is not impeded by having a lightness of heart. It's actually made deeper. So how then do we find lightness when we're feeling heavy? One way is to remember, if we were lucky to have had moments of lightness and playfulness as a child, can we remember for a moment what brought us to life as a young child? Was it a sport? Was it nature? Was it singing or dancing or acting? And maybe carving out some time, just a few moments here and there, to rediscover some of the joyful activities that we remember from our own life. Another is to borrow from someone else's menu.
Mm.
We all have met people who walk through life with an abiding sense of joy and lightness, even those who are working in hospice or who are living with a terminal diagnosis. They seem to have a soft smile. And so instead of judging, instead of self-doubt, I could never have that, what if we were to approach these people with curiosity and asking and even sharing, I'm having a hard time finding lightness in my life. How are you able to find such lightness in these heavy times? And then the last thing I'll share here, and there's a lot more that I share in the book and the chapter on lightness. The last thing I'll share is that often in the world of emotions, we think that the way in is through the brain and through our thoughts. And it took me a long time and a lot of mindfulness practice and mind-body practices to realize that that's not necessarily the most direct path. The most direct path to lightness is through the body, and is simply to have the experience of lightness and joy. Find someone that makes you smile. Find something that makes you laugh. And instead of allowing it to happen and to pass within seconds and to move on to the next distraction, can you commit not only to capturing moments of lightness in your life, to planning moments of lightness, but when they happen, to savoring those moments? What psychologist Rick Hansen, who I interviewed for the book, calls taking in the good. Not just letting it happen, but can you feel it in your bones? That's when changes begin to happen in the pathways in our body and our brain. We start to secrete more of the feel-good hormones of oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin and GABA, and the list goes on. And so I would suggest beginning small, remembering moments from the past, looking to others for guidance, and becoming a connoisseur of joy and learning what brings you joy and going after it.
Mhm.
Mm.
And laughter yoga.
Hmm.
I came across that recently. So that is just remembering that lightness should be part of education. I think that is so deep and so needed, and so is mindfulness. Mindfulness should be part of education, and I'm glad that it is becoming more and more. But this would be an amazing accomplishment when more and more of mindfulness is part of how everyone gets educated. Yeah. Yeah, so this was chapter 11, lightness. And as our listeners can see, all these connect with each other and they support each other. And these are part of the 7 traits that Dr. Fisher explores in Just One Heart. And any last words of wisdom, Dr. Fisher, or any questions, Sarah, that came to your mind as we listen to those topics?
I'm going to follow my own advice, and instead of words of wisdom, I'm going to pause and feel how it is in my heart and in my gut and in my body right now after this conversation. And I notice there is a lightness, even just having the conversation. And I want to thank you for allowing that.
Likewise, I think lightness is felt even here and in Ireland.
And
So,
gratitude really gladdens the heart. So gratitude does bring lightness.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time and your energy.
Thank you.